The Authors Forum exists to inspire success. We will talk with authors and others in the publishing industry to bring you essentials and advice. Dr. Veronica Esagui is your host for Authors Forum.
Welcome to the Authors Forum. I'm your host, Dr. Veronica Esagui, and my guest today is Jack Estes. Did I say your name correctly?
Yes, you did. Great job.
Thank you. Jack Estes is the author of the critically acclaimed Vietnam memoir, A Field of Innocence. It recounts his personal experiences in Vietnam and includes his actual letters home. Jack, welcome to the Authors Forum.
Well, thank you very much.
You are a United States Marine Corps veteran who served in Vietnam in 1968 through 1969, and you were wounded and decorated for heroism. Your book, A Field of Innocence, recounts your personal experiences in Vietnam as a combat Marine. That was terrible times. I know that, even though I was too young to remember that, believe it or not. So what draft, did you sign up for it, or were you drafted?
Well, actually, it was back in 1968, which was the height of the Vietnam War.
Oh.
And in 68 and 69, during the 2 years that I was there, over 28,000 Americans died in Vietnam. The reason that I joined the Marine Corps, I wasn't drafted. And the reasons were my girlfriend was pregnant, I was flunking out of college, I had no job and no money, and so we thought that if I went into the Marine Corps, at least they would be able to pay for the birth of our child. And as far as Vietnam, I really wasn't, not like people are today. I wasn't really up to what was going on, both politically and in the war itself. I knew it was horrible, but I had this thought that maybe I could get into being an MP and wear a nice uniform and that kind of thing.
How old were you?
I was 18.
Perfect age to be taken into the war, correct? You have no idea what's coming.
Right, and you're young and you're strong, and in boot camp you get a lot stronger, and that's what they do with soldiers, with Marines. They take people from all factions of life, and they try to strip them of their personalities and mannerisms, and take these young, raw civilians and turn them into Marines. They've been doing that for hundreds of years, and they're still doing that today.
Would you recommend for another 17 or 18-year-old to join?
Well, sure. I would do that. Of course, you don't wish to put young people in harm's way, but if you're looking at for service for your country, and you're thinking of being in the military, I would highly recommend the Marines.
Good. Your articles and essays have appeared in Newsweek, LA Times, Wall Street Journal, Chicago Tribune, and the Oregonian. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to note that I'm 64 years old, and from my service in Vietnam, I developed post-traumatic stress disorder. And writing my book was a cathartic way of trying to remove the pain, or at least have the pain dissipated by my writing. And so over the years, I've tried to write about veterans and veterans issues from all wars, World War II, Korean, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan. And so I've written articles lately that have been published. And I'm not an advocate of war, and I'm apolitical in my writing. What I try to do is to illustrate to people the great tragedy and it is to have to go into battle. I also show ways of how people come under the influence of war through post-traumatic stress disorder by not only telling stories about myself and my experiences and how it's impacted on me and my family and society in general, but other soldiers as well.
You are the one on the left side, if you're looking at the book. What kind of gun is that?
That's an M16.
M16.
Right.
When was this picture taken?
That was taken in February, about February 26th. And on February 27th, my best friend there, who is PJ in the book, was shot 4 times. And we were in a field trying to help remove a wounded corpsman and some other Marines, and that's me and PJ.
Right as you open the book cover, in black bold letters it says, "It wasn't brave or courageous to die, just unlucky." I would like to read this to those of you that have forgotten about the Vietnam War. "Life was everything. There were 5 of us shadowed by the log. This big tree, I thought, is here for me to live. I would use Roto to help me live. He's dead, but I'm alive. I could never help him, but he could help me. I reached out with with 2 hands, grabbed underneath the poncho, and tugged and pulled him over to the edge of my hole. Now I had 2 logs, one thick and strong made of wood, the other one Roto. Surely his body would stop a few rounds. Crack, crack, crack. The darkness erupted. Rounds began washing at the log. Long bursts and short explosions. Lines of green traces flew overhead. A scream somewhere down the trail behind us. "I'm hit!" Someone wasn't lower than the tree. Then a voice came out of the night that I would remember and carry with me for the rest of my life. It was monstrous and mocking, a terrifying demonic bellow. "Marine! Marine, you die!" I felt crazy with fear, as if the voice was shouting just at me. And that explains what war is about. When I read this, it was just like, I don't want to be there. I definitely don't want to be there. How do you feel about the draft being gone?
Well, I think that we should have a universal draft for everyone, and everyone should serve the country in some capacity. That doesn't mean you have to serve in a combat situation, but something, maybe similar to the Peace Corps or other organizations, have a universal draft that young people must serve in some capacity for maybe a year or 2 years to give back to your country. I think it would be very good to do that.
Mm-hmm. You wrote letters home.
Yes.
And Jack, would you read for us one of your letters? I saw one here on page 67.
As I mentioned, my girlfriend was pregnant. I actually had to go AWOL for a couple of days to get married. Oh. And so I was married when I went to Vietnam, and our baby was born while I was in Vietnam. This letter here is one of my first letters, and I've written a longer letter to my wife, Kristen, and this is to my unborn child. I think it's time I write you and tell you where I am and what I'm doing. Someday when you grow up, I want you to know how important you were to me and how I thought of you so much when I was here. I'm in a war in a little country called Vietnam. I'm here because our country says we're needed. I don't understand it all, and maybe I never will, but our lieutenant says maybe someday our being here will be important. I don't know. I do know it's hot and hard and scary and sad sometimes, and I do know I love and miss you and your mother very much. I'm a young dad, well, almost, and that's kind of scary too, but I'll get to grow up with you, I guess. I knew how hard it is on your mom, and I would give anything to be there when you are born. But when I come home, I'll never leave you again. I love you, my child. Your dad, August 1968.
So you were how old?
Well, I was still 18 when she
18.
was born.
Wow.
I turned 19 in Vietnam. Much too young to be a father. So, but it was interesting. We did have a chance to grow up and together. I know that may sound confusing, but no, I was very young.
Yeah.
So.
And this is wonderful that you were able to keep the letters, or that the people that you send the letters to, they kept them so that you were able to use them in your books, because it shows where you are, where your heart felt, and how you were at the time. For some of our viewers that might be too young to remember the Vietnam War, would you give us a short synopsis of what it was about?
Well, you know, there are many theories as to what the Vietnam War was about. Some will say that the Vietnam War was about the unification of North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and I guess maybe that's probably what it really was about. Back in 1954, after the French were kicked out of Vietnam, and they formed I think it's the 54th parallel. I don't remember exactly what that was, but North and South Vietnam were divided into two separate entities, two separate countries. But it was the North's long-standing desire to be reunited, even though the South didn't necessarily want that. And there are a lot of reasons that the war started with the United States involvement, and some of it say that it goes back to the Gulf of Tonkin, Gulf of Tonkin resolution, and that involves the United States Navy being fired upon in the Gulf of Tonkin region off of Vietnam by the North Vietnamese. And people will say it had to do with stopping the domino theory, the spread of communism throughout that section of the world, and then others may talk about the natural resources that were available, and I think when you're a young kid, you know, when you're 18, 19, 20, especially when you don't have the access to information like you do now with the internet and computers. I didn't have a broad perspective of the world, of Vietnam, of any of that. And so for me and for most of the soldiers, the war was about survival. It was about living to the next day. And as the days added up, it was about going home.
So who can benefit from reading your book, A Field of Innocence?
Well, I think a large cross-section of people can benefit from this. As I said, it's an apolitical book, and it's not just a war drama, although there are lots of combat in this book. But people could benefit that were veterans of the Vietnam War, and they can see that the character, myself, how I changed, and what happened to me that would cause post-traumatic stress disorder, and some of the early symptoms of that. And that would be beneficial for veterans in general, because they're in a position of being removed from actually being there, but at the same time, in a way, experiencing that trauma that I experienced and other soldiers experienced during that time period.
What are for those that have no idea, they're just going to go out there and have fun, practicing with their guns and coming back, and everything's going to be fine and dandy. What is that syndrome?
What is post-traumatic stress disorder?
What is that?
Well, very simply defined, it's when a human experiences something beyond the realm of normal human experience. For instance, women could could be raped and abused, and children could be abused, and they would suffer through this trauma, this great grief and trauma that is beyond the normal realm of experience. And so post-traumatic stress disorder is what happens after that trauma, and what kind of disorder is in your life. I have post-traumatic stress, and sometimes I have a disorder which interrupts my life and impacts on me in a negative way, and in turn it will impact on my family in a negative way. And veterans and their loved ones don't understand how it impacts on society as well. And so I would say that post-traumatic stress disorder, in its most simplest term, is experiencing something beyond that normal realm. Some of the things that a veteran will experience is hyper-alertness. And they'll have to sit in a cafeteria or a restaurant with your back to the wall, afraid of somebody coming up on you. You might be afraid of crowds. And it also has to do with distorted thinking and nightmares. Some of the things, like, for instance, when I was in business, I'd sit around a round table with lots of folks in suits and ties, and if I got aggravated by that person, I wouldn't think in my mind, well, what is he talking about, or why is he being that offensive? I'd think of taking a pistol and pistol whipping him, or I'd imagine him being shot and me doing it. And that distorted thinking, we refer to it as intrusive thoughts. And so it's very difficult. Another thing that veterans have a hard time with that have post-traumatic stress disorder is they feel bad about having survived. Survivor guilt is a very bad thing. I used to think that I wish I would have been wounded more severely, that someone could drive by and shoot me, or I would somehow get an arm or a leg amputated, so that I was experiencing the same trauma that other veterans have experienced in all those wars. The wars that are going on now with our soldiers, and have for the last decade, where they have impossible injuries, severe double, triple, quad amputations are horrible. And other veterans I know feel a sense of guilt for having survived and not having been wounded so severely. They don't think of being wounded as being in emotional anguish or pain, and they often think that they're weak for having suffered this.
Have you come to the conclusion of why you survived? Was there a reason for you to survive? Have you found that now, so many years later, as you look back, that it was a good thing that you survived?
Well, I certainly hope it was a good thing that I survived, but I can tell you why I believe that I survived. Well, one day we were out in the middle of a field, like I told you, in the middle of a rice paddy, trying to move a wounded corpsman. And we crawled out there, and we had to roll over a rice dike to get to him. And he was on his back, and we tended to his wounds and moved him to his stomach. There were other people on the other side of the rice dike, and there were enemy soldiers dug in about 25 to 50 meters away from us. And so as we were crawling back to this rice dike that was maybe 24 inches high, we had to raise up and then kind of jump across. As we were raising up, the enemy opened up on us, and the corpsman was shot again. My best friend that was with me, PJ, was shot 3 times, and then we were laying in the rice paddies next to the dike. 2 other Marines that were out there were shot. One guy was crawling away and his foot was hanging on by a thread, and it was a constant firing. And I was laying there with my head against the rice dike thinking, I've got a big, strong body. I can absorb some rounds. As long as I don't get hit in the head or in the neck, I think I can survive this. And I actually haven't talked about this in public, but it's in my book. And then I heard a voice talk to me, and I believe that it was God. And he said, don't be afraid. I will take care of you. And so I ran out of battle dressings and for my friend, and I took off my boot, took off my sock, and I tied it around his shattered arm. And he'd been shot in the shoulder and the chest, and he was laying on his stomach now, and got shot a 4th time in the buttocks. And he said to me, you got to get me out of here. I'm getting cut up. And then a few minutes later, he just said, leave me, leave me. Well, anyway, I was able to get PJ out of there, and that's what happened.
Are you okay to read something?
Sure, I'm okay. By the way, I'd like you to know, and I'd like all the people out there that are veterans or have veterans, that having post-traumatic stress disorder is nothing to be ashamed of. And I personally, through my writing, which was cathartic for me, I've also had hundreds of hours of therapy with one-on-one therapy, marriage therapy, group therapy with veterans at the hospital and in different venues for decades, really. And I don't believe that post-traumatic stress disorder ever goes away, because you'll always have those memories. The disorder may disappear, and you can live your life fully and happily, and I have and I am. But I think you need therapy, you need medication, and you need love. And my wife helped provide all of that. So I'm a very lucky man.
Very, very lucky. And I think, and this probably sounds crazy, but it's actually good to go through those feelings. You need, you cannot come out of something like what you just described before and just be all smiles and happy and just forget about your buddies that died. I think it's perfectly more than normal. It's totally needed that you have suffered. There's a good reason for crying.
Right, and they've done studies about veterans and others who have been in severe trauma, and there's actually a chemical imbalance that takes place in your brain.
I am sure.
So, they're trying all kinds of different medications, and you want to make sure you're not dependent upon that. But it takes a combination of those things to get through this.
I was going to ask you to read, but I feel stronger about hearing you speak.
Okay.
So I'm going to go on because of time. I wanted to ask you, you have also written an awards-winning screenplay titled A Soldier's Son, and you are definitely a gifted writer, because you don't just win an award-winning screenplay for just writing a few words. You have a lot of emotion when you speak, and so forward you are putting the emotion in what you're writing, and people that read this book should be able to understand that it's not just fun going out there to fight and coming back as a hero like a John Wayne movie.
Right.
Okay. So I'd like to ask you, also you've written a book titled Searching for Gurney, besides Soldier's Son, Searching for Gurney, and all of these are to come through. But there was one more important thing that I wanted to ask you before. is I know you have been active in working with the Vietnam veterans. Can you tell us a little bit about the Fallen Warriors Foundation?
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to tell you that A Soldier's Son is a book that I'm finishing now and doing the final rewrites, and I hope to have it published this year. Searching for Gurney will come sometime late next year. I've already finished several drafts of the manuscript. The Fallen Warriors Foundation was created from a trip that my wife and our two kids took when they were small to Vietnam. The intent of the trip was to find a Vietnamese soldier that helped save my life, and also a way of healing me for my own healing. For the first 6 months of my tour, I spent in the jungles, and the only Vietnamese that I saw in the jungles and mountains were the ones that we killed in combat. And for the rest of my tour, I lived in a small village outside of Da Nang with a group of 10 Marines, a Navy corpsman, and 15 to 20 Popular Force soldiers. They were really Vietnamese from the villagers that we were helping train. And it was called a Combined Action Platoon, and it was a very unique situation. And the same kind of military force was used very successfully in Iraq. But it grew out of the Vietnam experience. My wife thought that it would help provide healing for me. I knew a former soldier that served in Vietnam and was living in Vietnam, actually. And so he helped arrange for this trip, and we went back carrying medical and educational supplies and toys donated from what was called Northwest Medical Teams. Mm-hmm. And the idea that my wife had, and it was her idea, was that I could replace my muscle memory by carrying boxes of toys into my village and medical supplies instead of a machine gun and a rifle.
Awesome. That's awesome.
And so from that, coming back, we told people about what we did, and we ended up creating an organization called the Fallen Warriors Foundation, and did those same things on a much larger scale. I've taken and led groups of disabled veterans back to Vietnam.
And you have your website. What is the name of your website?
It's jackestes.com.
Jack Estes, J-A-C-K, Estes, E-S-T-E-S. And besides you speaking of the Fallen Warriors Foundation, you also have PTSD resources, related links. You even have a suicide prevention number that you can call anytime. And Jack, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you.
Well, it's an honor to be here.
You're awesome. You're awesome. I'm so glad you made it. It's just feel like shouting real loud. Hooray for Jack Estes.
Thank you.
Until the next Authors Forum, have a most inspiring week. Thank you.